Welcome students, welcome to the 38th presentation on topics in microeconomics. We are still with the subject of oligopoly. And oligopoly, by now you must have understood, it's a very interesting market form where there is a lot of complexity and there is a lot of rivalry that happens among firms, and also how firms act and react upon each other's behavior, and so many such issues have already been discussed in the earlier presentations. So this kinked demand curve that I'm presenting today is the last among the models in the non-collusive category of oligopoly. You will also be introduced to a special shape of the demand curve, and you will find how the kinked demand curve is formed under these conditions of oligopoly. Where did it originate? I have always shared with you a little bit about the origin of an idea, because that is what allows this continuity of ideas to develop. So we find that the original idea of an imagined demand curve or a kinked demand curve was with Chamberlin's small group model, where he explained, or he raised this issue about the intersection of the individual demand curve of the firm with that of the market demand curve. But Chamberlin did not use it in his own analysis. So we find later that two sets of economists picked up the idea, both simultaneously worked on the idea, and it so happens that both of them published their respective papers in the same year. And the first one was written by Hall and Hitch, Price Theory and Business Behavior, in the Oxford Economic Papers in May 1939. And this was followed by the other paper by Paul Sweezy, a neo-Marxian American economist, who wrote with the title Demand Under Conditions of Oligopoly in the Journal of Political Economy in August 1939. So now what I shall be doing in this particular presentation is I will not use Paul Sweezy or the Holland Hitch separately. I will take the essence of the two sets of economists and try and develop it to our academic interest. Holland Hitch makes this statement: under oligopoly, each firm has enough market power to prevent itself from being a price taker. That means oligopoly firms are generally price makers for their products. But each firm has another problem. Each firm has to face interfirm rivalry. And because of this interfirm rivalry, it is difficult for a firm to treat the market demand curve as its own demand curve. This results in cutthroat competition among the firms, which firms experience when they have to track with the other rival firms in their day-to-day work. So here, this Holland Hitch have questioned the demand curve that we use in conventional analysis, and he says that this conventional demand curve is not applicable in the case of oligopoly because of this kind of rivalry that firms face with each other. Now, there are assumptions here, and these assumptions are based on the behavioral pattern of these firms. One of the assumption is, if one of the firm increases its price, then the other firm will not follow that. And the other one is, when firm reduces its price, it expects that its rival will follow suit. So this is one, on one hand, that the other firm will not follow if the price is raised. On the other hand, if the price is reduced, then the other firms will follow. Assumes that there is a prevailing price in the market, and there is some sense of indeterminatedness of the demand curve. That means it is not possible to exactly determine the shape of the demand curve. We find that the demand curve is peculiar in this particular case, where the demand curve has got two segments, and these two segments have got different degrees of elasticities. The upper portion of the demand curve is relatively elastic, and the lower part of the demand curve is relatively inelastic. Remember, elasticity is the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. So the top segment will show that if there is a change in price, then the elastic demand, the change in price will bring about big change in the quantity demanded. Whereas the lower portion will show relatively inelastic demand, which will indicate that if the price is reduced, the quantity that will respond to that is much smaller. Now, when the firm increases its price, what will happen? The other firm is unlikely to follow suit and raise its price. So when other firms don't follow this firm will lose out customers, lose out the sales, and thus it will also lose out the market share. So that's the first part of raising the price. Remember, in Edgeworth model, we had talked about firms raising their price. So here, if the firm in this model, if we raise the price, the firm is going to lose out on customers. The second part of the demand curve indicates that the price is reduced, and when the price is reduced, other firms will follow suit. And why wouldn't the other firms follow suit? Because they would feel that if they do not reduce their price, they too will lose out on the market share, with the first firm getting a majority of the customers moving to its side. But unfortunately, what happens is the firm which has initiated the price for a reduction does not experience as much as expected an increase in his customer base. So he doesn't get that entire benefit of the price reduction that he has introduced. The first case, of course, the question the other firms would look at, well, if you would like to increase the price, you can increase the price, but they may not necessarily like to increase the price and lose customers. So this kind of a behavior is something unexpected or unknown. We don't experience these kind of things when we study the pure market forms of perfect market monopoly or monopolistic competition. Another thing, and this behavior emerged. Why does this kind of a behavior emerge? This kind of a behavior emerges because of the interdependent nature of decision making among firms. So one firm's decision is based on the decision of the other firm. That is why this kind of dynamic situation or a complex situation emerges. Let us see this with the help of a diagram, which we will see. Now, these two diagrams are the diagrams drawn by Paul Sweezy in his paper, and the other one by Hall and Hitch in his paper, in their paper. Now, you can see in the first paper that the demand curve is quite a different kind of a demand curve. We don't find the usual linear demand curve here. You're finding that this demand curve has got a kink. That means it goes up, it breaks, then it comes down. And that is how it is shown there. And Hall and Hitch demand curve also is not the smooth demand curves that we are so familiar with. So both these diagrams are original. I wanted to show you how they were originally drawn. But now when we teach in classrooms, in academic textbooks, what you find, there is something that has been changed here, and a more convenient diagram to show the characteristics of both the diagrams are used, and I shall be using that diagram for you. So let's follow this diagram. We have the demand curve DD represented in red color, and DE segment is bold lines, whereas the ED section of the demand curve is in dotted lines. That demand curve DD is fully shown just to show you that this is the demand curve which we are normally exposed to. So now what we shall do is, for the sake of this analysis, we shall ignore that portion of dotted line ED. So ED demand curve does not make any, does not offer any use in the analysis. Therefore, we shall discard that portion ED and be done with it. Take the other demand curve. There is one more demand curve in the same diagram, that is D1, D1. This D1, D1 is the blue color diagram, blue color demand curve, which has got a dotted line from D1 to E. The top portion D1 to E is dotted, and the lower portion ED1 is the bold blue line. So here again what we shall do is we shall ignore the demand curve's top portion, which is D1 and E. D1E of the blue demand curve we remove, and ED of the red demand curve we remove, we ignore. So what are we left with? We are left with the demand curve DED1. So DED1 is the demand curve which we are using for our analysis. Now, the price is determined at, we said that the assumption is there's a prevailing price. So the prevailing price is OP. At OP price, we find the output as OQ, and equilibrium is at point E. So at point E, price is OP and quantity in the market is OQ. Now, let's take the first stage. In the first stage, we raise the price. So we raise the price, from the firm will raise the price from OP to OP1. It is quite obvious what will happen with the price being raised to OP1. It is a relatively elastic demand. The DE segment is a relatively elastic demand. And when the price is raised to D1, that firm loses a lot of customers. So instead of having its original customers of OQ, which it was able to sell that many goods, instead of OQ, it will now get only OQ1 customers or demand. So its demand has fallen from OQ to OQ1 when the price has been increased to OP1. So this is something that we know. Now take the second case. When the firm decides to reduce its price, it is no longer seen on the first red demand curve. So this blue demand curve takes the price OP2. So when the price is at OP2, the quantity demanded in the market is OQ2. So the demand has increased from OQ to OQ2. But if you see that portion ED1 is the relatively less elastic segment of the demand curve. And therefore, we find that the demand curve, the price elasticity being lower, and with the fall in price from P to P2, the firm does not get the full benefit of the change or reduction in the price. The PP2 change in price has only come to QQ2. So QQ2 is a change in quantity and PP2 is a change in price. When we join the two demand curve, we get a kink at point E. So the question is, why did this kind of a demand curve emerge? It emerged because it was not possible for the firm to determine how the other firms would respond to its fall in the price, its reduction in the price. And that is the reason why there is an indeterminateness about the demand curve. So this kink in the demand curve is because of this uncertainty that the firm would have experienced when the firm reduced its price. So when the price increases or price decreases, that will determine the slope of the kinked demand curve. So how does it happen? That is based on the movement of the price. So the story is, once the price is set, then the price will become sticky, in the sense that price will stay at point P. It neither goes up nor comes down. So that price is what is called as sticky prices or rigid prices. Now, this is something that is seen among oligopoly firms which do not change its prices very often because of this peculiar problem. I have drawn the kink at the bottom. I have only taken the kink demand curve and shown you at the bottom. It is DED1. That is the shape of the demand curve. Now, in this diagram, you also saw that um, I had not introduced the marginal cost curve there. Let's look at the marginal cost and marginal revenue curve in this kink demand curve analysis. If you look at it, you will find that the marginal revenue curve has disappeared after the point A. So marginal curve indicates the additional revenue that the firm will get after sale of its goods. Now this marginal revenue curve flows down as we understand it, but it stops at point A. Thereafter, we find that the marginal revenue curve is not available. So what happened to the marginal revenue curve there? Then for a while there is no marginal revenue curve. We find that after A, there is the dotted line, red dotted line going downwards, and at point B, we get a new marginal revenue curve. Now, this new marginal curve BC is the marginal revenue curve of the second demand curve, that is ED1. So we get a marginal curve of DA for the first demand curve DE, and we get a new demand curve, a new revenue curve BC for the other demand curve ED1. So this ED1's demand curve is blue in color, and the yeah, and its revenue curve is blue in color, which is BC, and the demand curve there is D, and its revenue curve is DA. So in between A and B, there is a discontinuity, or that is where the marginal revenue curve disappears. So the two segments are separated by this vertical distance. And now let us say that we introduce the marginal cost curve. In our traditional theory, we use the marginal cost curve to explain the output and price determination. So now you will find here that though we have introduced the the marginal cost in the diagram, marginal cost is not influencing the price or the output. So the marginal cost curve is below the revenue curve to the left of the kink, and to the right of the kink, the marginal cost curve is above the kink. And both the marginal cost curve 1 and 2 shows the same kind of positions. Now, what are we to understand that? Here we need to understand that under oligopoly and kink demand curve analysis, it is not necessary for the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve to interact to set the price and output. Price and output is set by the interdependent behavior of the firms rather than the cost of production. It can happen that even though the cost has increased for the firm will have to absorb a part of the cost rather than pushing that cost in terms of the price of the produce. So the firm is not able to raise the price but has to bear a part of the cost if at all the cost has increased. So by doing this, why does this happen to the firm? This is true for the firm because the firm does not know its demand curve. The demand curve itself is indeterminate. So if demand curve is indeterminate, then obviously the marginal revenue curve is indeterminate, and therefore anywhere the cost curve comes, it doesn't influence the marginal revenue or the cost curve interaction to give us the price or the output. There is This is a new idea that you have, because we have always understood in the case of perfect market and other forms of market that the price is determined, price and output is determined at the price where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. This is a breakdown of the long held marginalist idea. For a long time, we believed that marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and this theory just questions that, and with that, it's a breakdown of the idea of marginalist rule. So, this has also a contribution of this particular King demand curve, that this can be questioned, that marginal cost need not be equal to marginal revenue. So even if cost increases, firm cannot increase the price, and profits would remain the same between the point B and C. So if profits are going to remain the same between the points between B and C, then there is no incentive for the firm to disturb the price and lose customers, though the intention is to increase the customers. So firms rather stay sticky with their price and maintain the business as it was going on. So equilibrium is at the point E, and the price is at P, and quantity is at Q. So this is where the whole story of Kinked demand curve settles, that in spite of a firm trying to change, increase the price or decrease the price, does not gain much benefit out of it, and therefore would rather keep the price the same, keep it as rigid. We can see that in some industry probably, where if the cost of production has increased, but the firm cannot pass on the burden to the consumers, because the consumers will shift from that industry to another industry. So the firms take up the loss for the time that they can bear it. Let's see what are the criticisms of this particular theory. It's not a theory of pricing is what we criticize it for. It is more of explaining the price stickiness. It is a way to explain, as a tool to explain the price rigidity or price stickiness that occurs in a oligopoly market situation. So it is not a tool helping us to determine the price in the oligopoly situation, and it does not explain price or output decision of individual firms, and it does not explain at which point will the kink appear, and what will be the kink point which will give the maximum profit to the firm. That is also not explained in this particular theory. So the critics often question the empirical evidence of this kind of an argument, and they say it remains mixed. Validity is a question, the all empirical validity is questioned, and similarly it is considered to be arbitrary. Hall and Hitch, for example, had interviewed 39 firms, and of which 33 firms were manufacturing. So by taking 33 manufacturing firms and concluding that this is how firms will behave, is often a question that is raised against the King demand curve. Can it be extended like this to other oligopoly firms, is often the criticism against this particular theory. Now, instead of this kind of a price war that firms may like to do, it is argued that firms may not want to enter the price war at all. They may rather go in for non-price competition, because that is something that they don't have to keep changing the prices, but they would give branding or advertising or other free services, so that they can still capture customers rather than changing price and trying to capture customers. So this does not consider the theory does not even consider the collusion that can happen among firms. Do firms really have to go through this kind of price competition of raising it and reducing it, or is it possible for firms to join together, make a kind of a collusion, and then get rid of this problem of uncertainty in the market? So it appears Anna Kourtsianis has a very important, a very interesting comment that she makes in her book regarding this model. She says, it appears attractive, though indeed it is surprising that most textbooks still discuss at length and present it as the most relevant theory in oligopoly. So it's not considered to be a theory in oligopoly at all. It is just at the maximum a tool to explain why that stickiness can happen. In spite of that, the question is this model relevant? Why do we study this model? It has become a part of the most curriculum that we study a kinked demand curve. But more important, it is that this demand curve has shown that the demand curve need not be the conventional demand curve that we have studied in pure markets or monopoly markets or the monopolistic market. It seems to have a different shape, and the different reasons for the shape is explained. And as much as it explains that the marginal cost and marginal revenue principle of equilibrium is questioned here, and that was a major contribution of this particular model. So I hope you're finding these lectures useful, and you are sharing it with your friends who too may be writing exams of NET or postgraduate or the CA exams or masters in commerce. So all these students will find these kind of presentations useful. So please share this video, and if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do subscribe. Thank you very much. So the next series of presentation will be on collusive oligopoly. Thank you.